Peace, peace. This your host, Selah Shalom. And this is the Cosmon teachings in the words of Jehovah and his angel ambassadors from the Cosmon Bible, Oahspe. And this is part 8 of Decoding the Bible with Oahspe. And this documentary is called Decoding Moses and the Torah. Now, the Bible doesn't give you a description of Moses, but the Oahspe does in the book of the Ark of Bond, chapter 15, verse 13, where it states, Moses grew and became a large man, being pure Ahuin, copper-colored and of great strength. So here Moses was copper skin tone. The Bible doesn't give you a description of Moses, although Moses was born in Africa. Now, it is said Moses wrote the first 5 books of the Bible. Well, as I have shown in previous vids, such as Decoding the Elohims of Genesis, where these stories of creation predate Moses and the Torah. So Moses could not have been author to events that predate his time period. Moses was sent to deliver a people out of bondage, being the Hebrews, and give them laws to govern themselves in communities. And Moses was given 613 laws to govern the people that left Egypt. Now the first commandment is, Hear, O Israel, the Lord thy God is one. This is the first law when you read Torah. But when you open up the Bible, it doesn't start with the first law, but with the story. And the story is not law, it's not Torah. Now in the Bible, it states that Moses killed a man because he seen a Hebrew and an Egyptian arguing, and Moses killed him and buried him in the sand, as stated in Exodus chapter 2, verse 12. Looking all around and seeing no one, he struck the Egyptian dead and hid him in the sand. And this is what most people believe. Now, this is a false account. We're going to decode this false account with the Oahspe, where it states concerning this event of Moses being a killer. In the book of the Ark of Bond, chapter 15, verse 32 through 34, it states, And the oracles of the Egyptians prophesied that when the Israelites were once out of the country, they would unite with the kingdoms whereto Moses had been ambassadors, and then return and overpower the Egyptians. Verse 33. And in order to stigmatize Moses, they said he fled away from Pharaoh's palace because he had seen 2 men, an Egyptian and an Israelite, fighting, and that Moses slew the Egyptian and buried him in the sand. And the records thus entered the report in the recorder's house. Verse 34. Moses was of tender heart, and he inquired of the Great Spirit, saying, Will ever a voice of justice speak in my behalf? Jehovah through his angels answered Moses, saying, Suffer thy enemies to put on record what they will, for the time will surely come when the truth shall be revealed unto men. Pursue thy course, for it shall be shown that thou dost still visit the king. Wherefore, had thou fled as the record state, thou would not return with the report hanging over thy head. See that? So here you can see it was the Egyptians who made up this lie about Moses to try to stigmatize the Exodus. So here Oahspe is clearing up a long-believed lie concerning Moses being a killer. And plus, it would be illogic for Moses to be a killer and come with a law, thou shalt not kill. This is contradicting and has caused confusion for centuries. And now with the Oahspe, it is clearing up this lie about Moses being a killer. He was not a killer. Now, after the Hebrews left Egypt, they were given laws to govern themselves. They were given 2 laws, one called the Leviticus Law, which you have in your Bible, and the other law was called the Oral Law, which was spoken, repeated orally, as described in the book of the Ark of Bond, chapter 20, verse 13. Verse 13, And in not many days Moses wrote the Leviticus Law, for the inner temple of Jehovah was in spoken words only, referring to the Oralites, referring to the oral tradition. But the outer temple was written. Wherefore it was said, the Hebrews had 2 laws, one which no man else knoweth, referring to the oral law, and one for them who are not eligible unto faith, being such as were called Leviticans, but not Leviticans in fact, but hangers on, who had followed the Israelites out of Egypt, and who for the most part had no God, little judgment, and no learning. So here it states that the Israelites had 2 laws. the oral law and the written law. The written law was for the outer temple, and the oral law was for the inner temple. Now, the story of Genesis, the Exodus, was written by the Egyptians and not the Israelites, as described in the book of the Ark of Bond, chapter 20, verse 17, 18, and 21, where it states, verse 17, the scribes and recorders assembled in Kionia and appointed Phia, an Egyptian, to write the departure of the Israelites out of Egypt. And Phia wrote the account and called it the Exodus of the Hebrews. And it was recorded in the king's house of records, and copies of it were sent to the large cities, and there recorded also. For such was the law of Egypt. Phia's record was afterward accepted by Ezra, and is that which is known to this day as the first book of Exodus. Verse 18. The book of Genesis, as stated, the book of Genesis, as it stood in the Egyptian records, was written by Akaboth and Dioram and Hezed, and was the substance from which Ezra copied it through his scribes, even as it is to this day. The inspiration of Genesis was from the god Osiris the False, and his emissaries, chief of whom were Yotaba and Egypt, who were angel servants to Osiris. And so far as the records now stand, the spirit of both books was the Egyptians' versions of the whole subject. See that? Verse 21. And behold, it came to pass that the records were worthless. And to make matters worse, the records were so voluminous, being more than 6,000 books, that the scribes of Ezra could make neither head nor tail of them. Nevertheless, they were all written, in the first place not by the Israelites, but by their enemies, wherein the testimony of the miracles is none the weaker. So here the first book of Genesis and Exodus are the works of the Egyptians. And as is stated, Ezra, who was responsible for putting together the Tanakh, got his information from these same accounts. So if you're going to follow the true laws of Moses, you should have 613 laws and nothing else. That makes up Torah. The writings and stories of the prophets are not Torah. The purpose of the prophets was to get Israel to return to the Torah. So the focal point has always been the laws and not a story to follow. Now, since the Tanakh was put together in 450 BC, it was then that the false stories of creation, the writings of the prophets prior to the captivity, was incorporated in with the laws. So when the Hebrews returned to Jerusalem with the Tanakh, it was a plagiarization, including stories and accounts that was not part of the original Torah. Remember, Torah is 613 laws. But Ezra came with the creation story and stories of the prophets, which were not to be added to the Torah. For Torah represents laws, statutes, and commandments, nothing else added. So this caused a split again after the Babylonian captivity. So from 450 BC coming down to the birth of Yeshua, there was confusion surrounding the Tanakh. In the last book of the Old Testament, Malachi describes the dark days of Jerusalem and describes a person that will redeem the people from straying from the Torah. And this person was Yeshua. And with that, I'd like to say peace and blessings and catch you on the next documentary called Decoding the Story of Yeshua. Shalom.